In this video, I'm going to be removing the drive shaft and changing a gearbox oil seal on my Megane, so stick around. Now, just before we start, it helps my channel a lot if you like, comment, and subscribe. You're most welcome to have a look at my previous content and see if there's something that you like. Let's get straight in the video. So I've discovered that my Megane has a leak, and that leak I originally thought was a rear main seal. Lucky for me, that wasn't the case, and it turns out just to be an oil seal that can be quite difficult to get to. So just keep in mind that this type of job is time consuming and does require a lot of patience. So let's dive straight into what type of tools you're going to need, because there actually are quite a few. Now, these tools are definitely not cheap, so if you don't have majority on hand, you may need to reconsider whether you want to do this yourself. Now, in Australia, I've received quotes from Renault specialists, and they range anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, and that's because this is quite a laborious task. So if you don't have the tools on hand and you're not really sure what you're doing, you're better off possibly taking it to a mechanic, as this is quite a rare fix anyway. Okay, tools. So I'm not going to go through every explanation because there are a lot of tools and you'll see them throughout the video. But first things first, safety glasses and earmuffs is preferred. You'll need a low profile hydraulic jack, 3,000 kg or more. If your car is low like mine, you're probably going to need a 45mm lift ramp. My one is made custom with just some timber. You're going to need 4 3,000 kg jack stands. You need a 4-litre oil catcher, sump plug removal kit, need some 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch adapters or vice versa, depending on what tools you have. You're going to need 2 600mm breaker bars, very important. Alongside the standard socket set, you also need some deep sockets, mainly 30mm for your wheel axle, as well as whatever size your wheel nuts are. Star Allen keys, seal puller. Torch and drills are preferred. It makes the job a lot easier. You need a fluid change syringe or whatever alternate you have. A hammer and a rubber mallet is important. A torque wrench. Now, torque wrenches also come in their own ranges. So I have 3 torque wrenches for this job. You need a torque wrench that's covering between 21 Newton meters of torque to 280 Newton meters of torque. So you might find yourself having 2 at minimum. Now, for fluid and parts, you're going to need non-hardening gasket sealer, semi-synthetic 75W80 gearbox oil. That's just the recommended in my area. Copper ease, and lastly, the genuine gearbox seal. There may be other tools that are quite common that pop up in the video, and I'll try my best to point them out. Before I go through the method, I will add that there are 2 ways of going about this. Now, there is a quick way and a long way. The quick way will require a second person to make sure you don't cause any damage, and the long way is better suited for one person tackling this job. And without any context, it's not going to really make much sense, but I'll just quickly narrow it down. In terms of the quicker way, having 2 people, you may be able to get the drive shaft out without removing all your suspension. However, if you don't have 2 people at hand, you don't want to risk damaging your splines on your drive shaft, you're better off removing absolutely everything, and that also includes taking out some clips and whatnot in your engine bay. So I'm going to show you the long method from start to finish because it covers both. Now, before you jack up your car, you want to loosen the wheel nuts, and you also want to start loosening the axle nut. Without a breaker bar, this job may be almost impossible. So just remember, you need that 600mm breaker bar. Now it's time to jack up your car, and just make sure your jack placement is correct. You're using the front jack point to actually jack up the car. You're using the back jack point to put the stand, and I found a jack point underneath the car where the engine is as a bracing frame, as you can see here, and the jack should hold fine. You're going to do this on both sides and start removing the plastic underguard. Now to use your sump removal bits to unscrew the sump plug so we can start draining the gearbox fluid. With the oil drained, you're now going to tighten back up your sump plug. Make sure it's clean and free of debris, and also make sure you replace the crush washer. You can buy one from Renault or any aftermarket places, but Your torque specs for this particular bolt will be 24 Newton meters, and now we can move on. With your wheel off, you can start turning your steering wheel so we can expose tie rods and makes it easier to get to. At this point, we're removing control arms and linkages, and you will need a spanner set, which I forgot to mention. Now, to remove linkages, you will need your star Allen keys also. So if you just use your spanner set only without the star Allen key, your bolts are just going to be spinning. So keep that in mind. I won't lie, I fought with the lower control arm bolts a lot, and it would have been very helpful to have a second person because you physically have to hold top and bottom bolts to get those removed. Now, for some stubborn linkages and control arms, you need to actually hit it with a metal hammer, not a mallet, and I highly suggest you put the bolts back on the threads to avoid any damage. From here, there's only one more bolt holding in that drive shaft from falling out. Now, this is at the stage where you need to decide whether you're going to get a second person to help you. When you're ready, you're going to unscrew this last bolt, which holds in the drive shaft, but be careful because there's absolutely nothing else holding it in and it can just fall out. With two people, you should be able to remove the drive shaft safely with the amount of space that you have. Just keep in mind, if you damage any splines, it might be a brand new drive shaft and they're very costly. Or if you're on your own, you've got plenty more bolts to unscrew and plenty more clips to undo. So let's get on with it. I'm using my smaller jack to pretty much brace the tower for the suspension, as I'm going to be unscrewing it and there'll be nothing else really holding it up. So for those solo goers, I suggest you take a break because this is where the job gets a bit more tedious and you'll be having parts lying around in no time. At the point that I realized that I needed a second person to put the drive shaft back in and I had to take everything out anyway, I started to lose my sanity. 2 minutes, mate. 2 minute job. How good's that? 2 minutes, mate. 2 minutes. That's what they told me. It was going to be a 2 minute job. Now, to remove the suspension strut tower, you have to remove this black plastic piece. Now, what's attached to it is the window wipers, which you've seen removed already, and there are a number of clips and bolts that are quite fragile, so you need to be very, very careful. Now, once this bottom piece is loose from both sides, you don't actually have to pull it out. You just need enough space to move it so you can get to all three strut tower bolts. Now, one thing that can make your life a lot easier before you start removing that strut tower and lowering it, it is beneficial to remove the caliper first and the disc because it is a very heavy component, and the caliper, you're not going to want to remove any brake lines or anything like that. So remove the caliper before you start trying to pull the tower out. And don't be an idiot like me, wear appropriate footwear because if you drop this heavy component on your feet, it's game over. So now you've got a blank canvas. You have a drive shaft lying around, parts everywhere, tools everywhere, and you're probably missing some bolts by now. What to do next? You can take your oil seal out and start putting everything back together. So let's jump into that. Using the seal puller, you're going to remove the oil seal. Now, this is a leverage tool, so be very, very careful. Take your time because there's not a lot of space to really work with. Once that's done, you want to really prep your area for the next steps of putting back a new seal and also using the non-hardening glue. So get a clean rag and start cleaning the surface of where the oil seal used to sit. Here are the seals side by side. Left is the old one, right is the new one. Now you can see there is a white plastic around the new seal. And I'm going to show you in a sec, this is probably the worst thing out of France that's ever been engineered that I've ever seen in my entire life. The genuine seal comes with a set of stupid instructions. What this basically tells you is you have to leave the plastic on, slip in the drive shaft, somehow move back the plastic only a small bit of the way, and then cut it with some f***ing scissors. No, you can't do that. it didn't work. Here's an attempt of me trying to do just that, and it does not break. This thing is so damn hard. I was even using it to try and knock my seal in place, and it's just a very hard bit of plastic. The original reason why my car has started leaking is because last time this seal was changed, whoever changed it never took this white thing off, and it's created a leak over time. So yeah, keep it on until you put the seal in, but then take the damn thing off before you put your drive shaft in. Before you put in the seal, you're going to apply this non-hardening gasket sealant just to reinforce the seal going forward. And before you put the seal in, just make sure that this is on both the mating surfaces on the car and on the seal. Now for the most important part of the job. Take your time when you're putting in the seal. What you want to do is you want to gently push it in with your hands, making sure it is as flush as possible. If you need to tap it in by any means, just make sure you're using light taps. There's not a lot of space in there, so you are going to use something long, most likely your breaker bar. But you need to be very, very careful. This must be flush with the rim. It cannot be pushed in any further, and it cannot be crooked, otherwise you'll start getting leaks as soon as you start the car. Once the seal is in its spot, you can now install the drive shaft once again. Make sure you check that the splines on the drive shaft, especially the ones that are going into the gearbox, are not damaged, because otherwise you'll need to buy a new drive shaft. And once again, just remember to remove that white thing from the seal. As a wise man said, you can't break it off. You just have to take the drive shaft back out and push it off. But the instructions say you can break it off. It's just so ridiculous. I'm just glad that's over. Once your drive shaft is in, we can then go ahead and bolt everything back together. I'm going to speed run through this and outline key points on certain instructions. So let's go for it. Tighten the drive shaft support bearing bolt to 21 Newton meters. You can now top up the gearbox using the syringe, and you want to top this up until it starts leaking, and make sure you check the seals on the filler cap to make sure that doesn't leak either. Once that's all done, you can now clean the splines of the drive shaft and then put on your anti-seize copper compound. You're pretty much ready to simultaneously mount the suspension tower, but also marry the hub to the drive shaft, and just ensure that you're using your jack so you can hold it all up, because you're only one person. To make sure it all holds, just screw in your drive shaft bolt. You don't have to screw it in that much. You'll tighten that later. Then moving on to your lower control arms, the bolts closest to the gearbox will be tightened at 180 Newton meters, and that's with thread lock. The bolt closer to your wheel will be at 63 Newton meters. Install the upper control arm at 44 Newton meters, and install the lower control arm links, there's two of them, at 44 Newton meters. Install your brake feed again and your speed sensor just hand tight. Install the disc and the caliper. The caliper torque settings are at 170 Newton meters. Now you can hand tight the drive shaft bolt, but do not torque it down just yet. Put the wheel back on and hand tighten those bolts as well. Drop the car to the ground, and then now you're going to torque spec the remaining bolts. The drive shaft bolt will be torqued at 280 Newton meters, and the wheel nuts will be torqued at 110 Newton meters, and make sure you're tightening them in a star pattern.
I've just filled up petrol and I'm taking the car for a little drive. I haven't put the undercover on, so I don't want to go too far. It's just to see to make sure the car's steering properly, for one, because I've undone tie rods and all that, but also just to move around the drive shaft, because it is a moving part, and then I'm going to go back under the car and just check for any leaks. Now, because this is an oil seal, you know, you never really know. It's best to drive the car and just see for yourself whether it's going to cause any issues. I've got absolutely no problem going back under the car, taking out everything again and replacing the seal if it didn't seal properly. I'm just making sure brakes are all good. Not that I impacted that too much. The gearbox feels about the same because the gearbox fluid was very new actually. It was changed only 2,000 kilometers ago, so it doesn't really make too much of a difference. I think that's good. I'm gonna head back to the garage, jack this car up and have a look underneath.
I can now declare the 250 Megane leak free. I'm extremely happy with the outcome. It saved me upwards of $1,000 just by doing it myself, and it's taught me a few skills along the way. If I have to do a drive shaft change on any other car, I'm sure it's almost the same concept. Lucky last thing to do is just slapping on this plastic cover. But if this video helped you, I'd like to know about it in the comments. You're welcome to ask any questions if it helps. And I would also appreciate it if you leave a like and if you subscribed if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.